The harsh fluorescent lights of JFK International Airport cast a cold glow over the terminal as I stood motionless, my fingers gripping the boarding pass. The air buzzed with the sound of announcements, conversations, and rolling suitcases. I barely heard any of it. My world had already gone silent. My mind played a loop of the last few hours, a merciless slideshow of betrayal that I could not escape. Hours ago, I had been in my office on the 62nd floor of the Empire State Building, preparing for a routine software rollout. The hum of the servers, the scent of freshly brewed coffee from the break room, the sound of my colleagues discussing weekend plans, all of it had felt so normal, so secure. But then, the email arrived. No subject line, just a link. Curious, I had clicked, not knowing that within seconds, my entire reality would be rewritten. The video started with an upscale hotel lobby, one I recognized immediately, the Plaza. The timestamp showed last night. Then, the camera panned, and there she was, my wife, Ashley, standing by the marble reception desk, laughing. Not alone. Mike Fletcher, my boss, my friend. They moved through the opulent halls, her hand brushing against his arm as he led her toward the elevator. The doors slid open, and before stepping inside, she tilted her head up, looking at him the way she used to look at me. Then, she kissed him. Not a friendly peck, not a mistake. A deep, slow kiss, filled with something unmistakable, passion. I had felt my breath stop in my throat, my pulse hammering so loudly I thought I might pass out. But the worst part wasn't the kiss. It was what came next. The video shifted, now a different angle, a hidden camera feed from inside a hotel room. I saw the bed. I saw my wife. And I saw things I could never unsee. For minutes, I sat frozen at my desk, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of something that had no explanation. My mind raced, flipping through the past years, searching for signs I had missed. Ashley's late nights at the office, the sudden shift in perfume, the way she had started guarding her phone like a sacred artifact. It had all been there, but I had ignored it. Then, the fury hit. Not just anger, but a deep, raw rage that burned through me with a force I had never felt before. I had given this woman everything. I had built a life for us, carved out a future, and she had set it ablaze without hesitation. I stood up so fast my chair clattered to the floor. My hands trembled as I grabbed my company laptop and wiped everything clean. Then, I walked straight into Mike's office. He wasn't there, but I didn't need him to be. I set my resignation letter on his polished mahogany desk, along with my company badge. No explanation, no goodbyes. Just the finality of my decision staring back at me in black ink. I walked out of the building without looking back, taking only what mattered. My personal laptop, my phone, and a single flash drive. On it was everything. Ashley's messages, her hotel reservations, her credit card transactions. Evidence. Proof. A weapon. Outside, the streets of Manhattan pulsed with life, indifferent to my agony. I moved through the crowds, not knowing where I was going until I found myself at a bar. The Dead Rabbit. I had been there before, back when life still made sense. The place smelled of whiskey and leather, the air thick with quiet conversations. I sat at the counter and ordered a double Jack Daniels. The burn of alcohol did nothing to dull the storm inside me. My fingers traced the rim of the glass as my mind whirled with possibilities. I could confront her, scream at her, demand an explanation. But what good would it do? She had already made her choice. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the email she had sent me earlier that morning. Good morning, love. Hope your day is amazing. Can't wait to see you tonight. Lies. Every word. A dagger twisting deeper into my gut. Then, a realization settled over me like ice. Ashley didn't know that I knew, and that gave me an advantage. Slowly, I exhaled. I finished my drink, stood up, and left cash on the bar. My next steps were already forming, calculated, and precise. I hailed a cab, giving the driver only 2 words, JFK Airport. I didn't need a plan. I didn't need to overthink. I just needed to disappear long enough to set everything in motion. And when I returned, Ashley wouldn't even recognize the man standing in front of her, because I would no longer be her husband. I would be her reckoning. The night air in Manhattan was thick with the scent of rain and gasoline as the taxi sped toward JFK Airport. The city's neon glow blurred outside the window, but I wasn't looking. My eyes were fixed on the small flash drive in my hand, the weight of its contents heavier than anything I had ever carried. The bartender at the Dead Rabbit had barely blinked when I downed my whiskey and walked out without a word. Now, the plan was taking shape. The first step had already been taken. I had erased myself from the life I had built. No job, no obligations, no more living in the shadow of my own blind devotion. My resignation sat on my boss's desk, my keycard abandoned alongside it. Soon, Ashley would wake up in our apartment, check her phone, and realize something was wrong. She would call me, maybe even panic, and I wouldn't be there to answer. Inside the terminal, the chaos of human movement buzzed around me. Families, tourists, tired business travelers dragging suitcases behind them. I walked past them all, my pulse steady, my mind sharp. My flight to Los Angeles was set to board in an hour. That gave me time. Stepping into a dimly lit airport lounge, I took a seat at the farthest table, away from prying eyes. I flipped open my laptop, inserted the flash drive, and took a deep breath before clicking on the folder labeled Ashley. The truth? The screen illuminated with a series of meticulously organized files, screenshots of messages, emails, bank statements, hidden camera footage, a digital graveyard of my marriage. Each file confirmed what I already knew, but made it even more real. Transfers from Ashley's account to a discreet Venmo profile under Mike Fletcher's name. Hotel reservations booked months in advance, long before her lies had begun to escalate. Private texts that were no longer attempts to hide, but full-fledged declarations of her love for him. Mike, when I'm with you, I feel alive. I wish I could escape from my life and just be yours forever. The words burned as if she had carved them into my skin. I clenched my fists. My decision to leave had been the right one, but leaving wasn't enough. The world needed to know who she really was. I connected to the airport's public Wi-Fi, created a burner email, and started attaching the files. First, to Mike's wife, who had no idea she was married to a fraud. Then, to Ashley's parents, the same parents who once called me the best thing that ever happened to their daughter. Then, to her company's HR department. One final email, addressed to everyone in our social circle, simply titled, "For those who think you know Ashley." With one press of a button, her perfect world would start to crumble. My hands trembled as I hit send. The confirmation popped up. The messages were out. It was done. I closed my laptop and took a slow sip of coffee. The bitterness matched the feeling in my gut, but I welcomed it. A decade of lies had ended, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. A notification buzzed on my phone. Ashley, where are you? I woke up and you're gone. I'm worried. Call me, please. She had no idea. Not yet. I stared at the message for a long moment, then powered the phone off. No more lies. No more explanations. By the time she pieced it all together, I would be thousands of miles away, out of reach. The overhead speakers crackled, announcing my flight's departure gate. I grabbed my bag, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the gate without looking back. The plane sliced through the night sky, a metal bullet hurtling westward. Below, the sprawling lights of New York City shrank into a sea of black, fading like a distant past that no longer held me. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes, yet the images behind my eyelids were relentless. Ashley, her fingers tangled in Mike's collar, their lips pressed together in a hidden corner of that hotel lobby. My mind replayed it like a cursed reel, each frame more excruciating than the last. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. The cold glow of the screen illuminated my hands, steady despite the fire burning inside me. I had already set the first dominoes in motion, my resignation, the exposure of Ashley's betrayal, but this wasn't enough. I needed to ensure neither of them walked away unscathed. First, Mike Fletcher. He was more than just my former boss. He was the orchestrator of my humiliation, a man who had taken not only my career but also my marriage and twisted them into his own private indulgences. The files I had leaked to his wife were only the beginning. My next move was to dismantle his empire, the company I had helped build with years of dedication and expertise. I logged into a secure server, one I had set up months ago when I first suspected things were amiss. Through encrypted backdoors, I accessed the company's internal systems, bypassing the firewalls I had once designed to keep others out. Mike had left digital fingerprints all over the place. Off-the-books payments, fraudulent transactions, expense reports bloated with personal indulgences. It took less than an hour to compile a full report and send it directly to the board of directors. By morning, an internal investigation would begin, and Mike would be fighting for more than just his reputation. Next, Ashley. Her world revolved around social perception. Her curated life of polished Instagram posts, networking events, and the illusion of a perfect marriage. I had already shattered that illusion with the emails, but I wanted to ensure she felt the weight of her choices. I accessed her cloud storage, scrolling through years of messages and personal files, each one reinforcing just how little I had meant to her in recent months. I drafted a final message, scheduling it to be sent at sunrise. It contained everything: screenshots, videos, call logs. It went to her closest friends, colleagues, even the university where she lectured part-time. The mask she had so carefully maintained would crack beyond repair. The fallout would be immediate and absolute. With my work done, I exhaled slowly and closed the laptop. A flight attendant approached, her voice gentle as she asked if I needed anything. I declined, staring at the reflections in the small window beside me. Thousands of feet below, America stretched into the darkness, indifferent to my pain, my anger, my plans. For the first time in years, I had nothing to lose. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, my phone vibrated against my thigh. I had left it off for hours, but curiosity got the best of me. When I powered it on, the notifications flooded in. Missed calls, messages, desperate voicemails. Ashley's frantic attempts to reach me. Where are you? What have you done? Please, we need to talk. I let the phone drop back into my lap, the screen still glowing with her unread words. Whatever she had to say no longer mattered. The past was behind me, its bridges burned beyond repair. As the wheels touched the tarmac, I allowed myself a small smile. The war had begun, and I was winning. The air in Los Angeles was different, less suffocating than New York, yet tinged with a strange sense of unreality. The moment I stepped off the plane, the weight of my decisions felt heavier, but I welcomed it. The war had begun, and every step forward was another toward reclaiming my power. A black sedan was waiting outside the terminal, arranged through a private service I had booked before leaving New York. The driver barely spoke as I sank into the back seat, my eyes flickering between the city skyline and my phone screen. The notifications hadn't stopped. Ashley had finally realized that her world was unraveling, and her messages had become more desperate. I ignored them. My destination was a high-rise in downtown LA, an executive suite rented under a name that wasn't mine. It was a necessary precaution. If Ashley or Mike tried to track me, they would hit dead ends. I couldn't afford distractions now. I had set my plan in motion, but there were still pieces to move before the final strike. As soon as I entered the suite, I connected my laptop to the secure network and began monitoring the fallout. The company's internal investigation had escalated faster than expected. The board of directors had already convened an emergency meeting. Mike's fraudulent activities had come under scrutiny, and legal action seemed imminent. His downfall was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. Ashley's social life had also imploded. Screenshots of her conversations, bank statements, and hotel bookings had circulated among our mutual friends. The carefully curated image she had built was now in shambles. She had spent years making people believe she was perfect, but perfection was fragile. It only took a few well-placed cracks to bring it crashing down. Still, my work wasn't finished. There was one last step before I disappeared completely. I needed to make sure Ashley felt the depth of her betrayal in the way that mattered most to her, her career. I accessed the email drafts I had prepared earlier, detailing her inappropriate relationships with influential clients and her misuse of company funds. The evidence was damning enough to ensure her immediate dismissal. I scheduled the email to be sent to her superiors at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning. With my final move set, I leaned back in the chair, exhaustion creeping in. The past 24 hours had drained me, but there was a cold satisfaction in knowing I had dismantled everything she had taken for granted. I poured myself a drink from the Sweets minibar, staring out at the city below. It was strange, knowing that by morning, I would no longer exist in the world I once knew. I had erased myself from my past life, burned every bridge, and set fire to the foundation that had once supported me. But I didn't feel regret. Regret was for the weak. I had been weak for too long. As the night stretched on, I allowed myself a few hours of sleep, knowing that when I woke up, the final stage of my revenge would be underway. At 8:55 a.m., my alarm jolted me awake. I sat up immediately, checking my laptop. The email was in queue, seconds away from being released. I refreshed the page, watching as it sent itself into the digital abyss, carrying the last piece of Ashley's world with it. By 9:15 a.m., my phone vibrated with an incoming call. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. Ashley's career was over. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. Then, without hesitation, I powered it off, stood up, and walked out the door. The countdown was over. It was time to disappear. The moment I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit me, sharp against my skin. Los Angeles was awake now, the streets pulsing with people who had no idea that, somewhere in this sprawling city, a man had just dismantled his past life with surgical precision. My suitcase felt lighter in my grip, though I knew its weight wasn't measured in fabric and belongings. It was the weight of knowing that, by now, Ashley's world had completely fallen apart. I walked through the sleek lobby of the high-rise, nodding to the receptionist as I stepped outside and hailed a cab. The destination was already in my mind. An old contact, someone who had helped me once before. A fixer, the kind of person who operated in the gray space between legal and illegal. The kind of person who could make a man disappear without a trace. As the taxi weaved through traffic, I took out my phone, hesitating before turning it back on. It was foolish, I knew. Ashley had nothing left to say that I wanted to hear, and yet I needed to confirm that my final move had landed as intended. The screen flickered to life, notifications bombarding me instantly. Missed calls, voicemails, messages. One stood out. Not from Ashley, not from Mike, but from an unknown number. I clicked on it, my pulse steady but alert. The message was short, almost clinical in its wording. You think you've won. You haven't. My first instinct was to dismiss it. Ashley was unraveling. Mike was losing everything. Who else could possibly have a stake in this war? But something about the message gnawed at me, a splinter lodging itself deep in my mind. I leaned back, my fingers tapping absently against my knee as I stared out the window. The cab pulled up outside a nondescript building in an industrial district, a place where anonymity was currency. I paid the driver and stepped out, my eyes scanning the surrounding area out of habit. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and old paper, the kind of place where time moved differently. A man sat behind a desk, his eyes barely lifting as I approached. He was exactly as I remembered, calm, unshaken by anything the world could throw at him. You look like hell, he said, without preamble. I need a clean slate, I replied. He nodded once, then reached into a drawer, pulling out a thin folder. New name, new ID, cash accounts offshore. But I need to know, are you running from something or toward something? I hesitated. Both. He studied me for a moment, then pushed the folder across the desk. 3 days. Then you vanish. I took the folder without another word, exiting back into the daylight. My time was running out, but something told me I wasn't the only one playing this game. By the time I reached my temporary hideout, my mind was spinning through possibilities. Who had sent the message? What did they mean? I powered on my laptop, running a deep search through the systems I still had access to. If someone was trying to warn me, or worse, threaten me, I needed to know who. The answer came faster than expected. Hidden deep within company files, buried under layers of encrypted data, was something I had overlooked. A pattern of transactions, small at first, insignificant. But as I traced them, a name emerged. Not Mike, not Ashley, but someone I hadn't suspected, someone I had trusted. Gabriel Nelson. The realization hit me like a gut punch. Gabriel, the CEO who had offered me a lifeline, the man who had welcomed me into his home, into his company. He had been involved with Mike long before I ever realized it. The deals, the offshore accounts, they had all been connected. I had just exposed Mike, but Gabriel was still standing. And now, he knew I was coming for him. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The message hadn't been a threat. It had been a warning. And I had just stepped into something far bigger than I had anticipated. The realization settled in my mind like a slow-burning fire. Gabriel Nelson had been a part of this from the beginning, his name hidden beneath layers of deception. I had thought I was in control, that I was the one orchestrating the downfall of those who had betrayed me. But now, the battlefield had shifted, and I was standing on the edge of something much darker than a simple revenge plan. I shut the laptop and exhaled. Panic was not an option. My plan had been precise, each move calculated. But now, a new variable had entered the equation, and I needed to adapt quickly. My original goal had been to disappear, to leave behind the wreckage I had created and move forward with a new identity. But that was no longer enough. If Gabriel had reached out to me directly, it meant he was aware of what I had done. And if he was aware, he wouldn't just let me walk away. I grabbed the folder the fixer had given me and flipped through the documents. A new name, a fresh passport, bank accounts under aliases, everything I needed to vanish. 3 days. That had been the timeline. But now, every second counted. I pulled my duffel bag onto the bed and began packing methodically, ensuring I had only the essentials. Money, burner phone, laptop. The weight of my decisions pressed down on me, but hesitation would only make things worse. As I zipped the bag shut, I turned back to my phone, scanning the last message again. You think you've won. You haven't. A direct message from someone who wasn't bluffing. I needed to assume I was being watched. My movements, my communication, everything could be compromised. Gabriel was powerful, connected, and dangerous. He had watched Mike fall, and now he was ensuring that I wouldn't walk away unscathed. I needed an exit strategy that he wouldn't anticipate. Instead of heading to the airport as originally planned, I left my hideout on foot, blending into the bustling streets of downtown Los Angeles. The air was thick with the scent of exhaust and fried food, the rhythmic hum of traffic masking the sound of my own hurried footsteps. I turned down a side street, keeping my head low, scanning every reflection in the glass windows I passed. If I was being followed, I needed to identify the threat before it identified me. By the time I reached the train station, my mind was already forming contingencies. Flights could be tracked, rental cars flagged, but a train ticket paid for in cash? That was harder to trace. I purchased a one-way ticket south, towards San Diego. From there, I could cross the border into Mexico, buy more time, and reassess my next steps. As I sat in the terminal, waiting for my departure, a sense of unease crept over me. The message had been a warning, but Gabriel hadn't made another move. Why? If he wanted to stop me, he had the means. Yet, he hadn't sent anyone after me. No obvious tales. No threats beyond that one cryptic text. That could only mean one thing. He was waiting for me to make a mistake. The train arrived, and I boarded quickly, choosing a seat near the back where I could monitor both the doors and the platform. The lights flickered as the train lurched forward, and the city began to fade behind me. I exhaled slowly, trying to loosen the tight coil of adrenaline in my chest. The first step of the escape was complete. Now, I needed to figure out what game Gabriel was playing. My laptop remained closed in my bag. Accessing any digital networks was too risky. If Gabriel had infiltrated Mike's financial dealings, there was no doubt he had the resources to monitor my activity. I had to rely on instinct now, on skills I hadn't used in years. If I could get to Mexico undetected, I could find another fixer, establish a new plan, and disappear for good. As the train hummed along the tracks, I let my thoughts drift back to Ashley for a brief moment. By now, she had lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her perfect life. And yet, I felt nothing for her anymore. Whatever love had once existed between us had been obliterated by the choices she had made. My revenge against her was complete, but my war with Gabriel had only just begun. An hour into the journey, the train slowed unexpectedly. A mechanical voice announced a delay due to unscheduled security checks at the next station. My grip on the armrest tightened. Unscheduled? That was no coincidence. I scanned the other passengers, looking for anyone out of place. Business travelers, students, a mother with a sleeping child. No one stood out. But that didn't mean I was safe. As the train rolled into the next station, uniformed security officers stepped aboard, moving methodically down the aisle. My heart pounded as one of them paused a few rows ahead, speaking quietly into a radio. I resisted the urge to move, to react. If they were looking for me, running would only confirm my presence. The officer scanned the seats, then nodded to another further down. They weren't looking for a random suspect. They were looking for me. I forced myself to breathe evenly as one of them locked eyes with me. He stepped forward, his posture neutral but authoritative. "Sir, we need you to come with us." The officer's presence in front of me confirmed my worst suspicion. Gabriel had made his move. The timing was precise, orchestrated to perfection. He had waited until I was vulnerable, trapped in a confined space with limited escape routes. I met the officer's gaze with feigned calm, masking the rapid calculations running through my mind. Resistance would only escalate the situation, and I needed to determine the nature of the threat before I acted. I nodded and stood, gripping my bag as naturally as possible. The other passengers barely looked up from their phones, uninterested in what seemed like a routine security check. The officer didn't cuff me, didn't say anything further, only gestured for me to walk ahead. That small detail told me something important. This wasn't an arrest. If it had been, protocol would have dictated a more forceful approach. This was something else entirely. As we stepped onto the platform, I scanned my surroundings. The station was quieter than expected, the usual noise of travel reduced to an eerie hum. Another officer stood nearby, his attention fixed on me. No weapons drawn. No outright aggression. Just observation. I was being assessed. I was led through a side exit, away from the main terminal, into a restricted access hallway. The moment the door closed behind us, the lead officer's demeanor shifted. He relaxed slightly, exchanging a glance with his colleague before focusing back on me. "You're not under arrest," he said finally. "But we need to talk." I remained silent, letting him fill the void with information. The less I revealed, the better my chances of staying ahead of whatever trap had been set for me. "Gabriel Nelson sent us," the officer continued. "He wants to make you an offer." The word struck me harder than any physical blow. Gabriel wasn't just trying to eliminate me. He was trying to recruit me. The realization sent a wave of revulsion through me. After everything I had done to dismantle his empire, after everything he had seen me do to Mike and Ashley, he still thought I could be bought? I exhaled slowly, controlling my reaction. If Gabriel had gone through the trouble of intercepting me rather than eliminating me outright, it meant he saw value in keeping me alive. That gave me leverage. But leverage only mattered if I played this correctly. "I'll listen," I said, my voice even. The officer nodded and handed me a phone. The screen was already lit, a call connected. I took it reluctantly, lifting it to my ear. Gabriel's voice was smooth, unhurried. "You're smart, I'll give you that." I said nothing. He continued. "You've made quite a mess, but you've also proven something to me. You think like I do. You see the cracks in the system, and you know how to exploit them. That's a rare skill." I clenched my jaw, waiting for him to get to the point. "I can offer you something better than running," he said. "A future. A place where you don't have to look over your shoulder. Work for me, and I'll make sure you disappear on your terms." I let the silence stretch, considering my options. Trusting Gabriel was impossible. Accepting his offer would be like stepping into a deeper web of deception, one where I would always be at his mercy. But declining outright wasn't an option either. "Not yet. You have 24 hours to decide," he said. "If you run, I will find you. If you stay, you'll never have to run again." The call disconnected. The officer took the phone back and gestured toward the hallway. "We'll release you here. Your choice, but don't waste time." I walked out without another word, my mind already sifting through possibilities. Gabriel had underestimated me if he thought I would simply fall in line. There was a way out of this, but it required precision. I made my way back toward the city, moving through side streets, ensuring I wasn't being followed. My next steps needed to be methodical. I needed to make Gabriel believe I was considering his offer while preparing my final strike. If I played this right, I wouldn't just escape. I would take everything from him. The city stretched before me, a labyrinth of lights and movement, indifferent to the war I was waging in the shadows. Gabriel had given me 24 hours to decide my fate, but in reality, I had already made my choice. There would be no alliance, no submission, only destruction. The only question that remained was how cleanly I could pull it off. I needed to move quickly. Gabriel was powerful, but his biggest weakness was the same as Mike's: arrogance. He believed he had me cornered, that I would fall into his web like so many before me. He had underestimated my desperation, my unwillingness to bow. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous kind of enemy. Returning to my hideout, I activated my laptop and plugged into my secure system. The encrypted files I had gathered over the years, documents, transactions, messages, were ready to be deployed. Gabriel thought he controlled the narrative, but I held the evidence that could dismantle everything he had built. Offshore accounts, fraudulent business dealings, bribery trails, all neatly packaged and ready for release. I set up a series of timed uploads to multiple news agencies, federal authorities, and private watchdog organizations. Once initiated, they would trigger automatically, ensuring that even if something happened to me, the information would still spread like wildfire. The world would see Gabriel Nelson for what he was, a kingpin operating under the guise of legitimacy. There would be no escape for him once the truth was out. But I needed to ensure I got out first. The streets were no longer safe. Gabriel had men watching every potential exit, and my usual escape routes were compromised. I needed an alternative. Thinking fast, I hacked into the city's transportation system and rerouted security footage, creating a false trail that made it seem like I was heading toward the train station. In reality, I moved in the opposite direction, blending into the crowd of a nearby shopping district before slipping into a back alley. Time was slipping away. Gabriel would soon realize I wasn't falling in line. I needed to stay ahead, to be 3 steps in front of his response. With each calculated movement, I made sure my digital footprint was erased, leaving behind only ghosts and misinformation. I booked a last-minute flight under a stolen identity, purchasing the ticket in cash. The destination didn't matter, only distance did. As I arrived at the airport, I kept my posture relaxed but my senses alert. The terminal buzzed with movement, travelers lost in their own worlds, unaware of the battle unfolding in the shadows. I made my way toward the gate, passing through security without issue. But just as I reached my boarding area, I noticed them, 2 men standing near the entrance, scanning the crowd with practiced precision. Gabriel had sent his watchers. For a brief second, my muscles tensed, but I didn't let the fear take hold. This was expected, anticipated. I adjusted my course, moving casually toward a side exit instead of walking directly to the gate. Every move had to be deliberate, every step part of a larger plan. If they caught me now, everything I had set in motion would be for nothing. I ducked into a restroom, using the seconds of solitude to pull out my phone and activate the final phase. The files began uploading, the servers processing the data at lightning speed. In minutes, Gabriel's empire would begin to crumble. His influence, his reputation, his power, it would all turn to dust. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be too late. Stepping back into the terminal, I saw the 2 men still searching. Their movements were controlled but urgent. They knew I was here, but they didn't know where. I seized the opportunity, slipping into a group of businessmen boarding a different flight. My real boarding pass was still in my pocket, but for now, I needed cover. The key to survival was misdirection. The final boarding call for my flight echoed through the speakers. I moved with purpose, blending seamlessly with the last wave of passengers. The moment my foot crossed the threshold of the jet bridge, I allowed myself the first deep breath in what felt like days. The plane was my sanctuary now, the sky my only ally. As the aircraft ascended, I pulled out my phone one last time, watching as notification after notification flooded my screen. News agencies had picked up the leaks. Social media was ablaze with scandal. Gabriel's empire was collapsing in real time. A single message appeared on my screen, an unknown number once again. I opened it, already knowing who it was from. You won't outrun this. I stared at the message for a moment before deleting it. Gabriel's game was over. Mine had just begun.